Nations carefully craft what national identity looks like, and so do political movements. Artists do it too. What national identity is evolves in response to events as a change in the political or the economic or social situation. These can trigger changes in national identity. Equally as important are developments in technology and data compilations. Let's take a look at an identity look that's being crafted in these very busy moments of the Trump Republican Party. Amidst the kidnapping, imperialist greed, and chaos, the identity of the MAGA look is emerging. The total MAGA look is form-fitting clothes on super trim bodies, and it's the face, known as the Mar-a-lago face, that has these certain types of superimposed cosmetic enhancements that completes the MAGA look. This aesthetic is a political signal that allegiance to the Donald Trump party and whatever lack of values the Donald Trump administration has. In direct contradiction to the MAGA look is the kufiya.
The act of someone identifying as a MAGA supporter wearing a keffiyeh would be highly unusual and a significant political paradox, as the two symbols represent opposing ideologies in the current U.S. political landscape. There are no reports of this happening in a genuine political context.
The kufiya is a scarf. When worn on the head or chest, the kufiya polarizes Western public opinion much in the same way that the Mar-a-lago face does. Controversy around the kufiya swells when political environments are heated and quietens when news of the wars, intifadas, and genocides quietens in mass media. The mafak min rasi is to examine the presence of the kufiya in contemporary Arab art, understand where the agency and power of the kufiya comes from, and to understand how might contemporary Arab art move beyond the kufiya. The British Museum acquired their first kufiya in 1966. A museum collection term for an item is simply museum object. Hatoum transformed an object into a sculpture. The work titled Kufiyeh humanized the object kufiya by weaving human hair into cotton fabric. Khalid makes a good point with the kufiya motifs of fishnets and olive leaves, or without the motifs, the identity of the kufiya remains, much like the boundaries of the land. It doesn't start from here, but Yasser Arafat's kufiya is associated with activism for Palestinian national independence in the 1960s, because the mass media in the 1960s had a global reach. So media, like broadcast TV and print media, allowed for the kufiya to enter the global mainstream consciousness. This fed into the 1960s rise of counterculture, notably of activism and social justice. The kufiya's association with resistance movements started much earlier than Arafat's kufiya. The kufiya's association with resistance movements started in the 1930s with the revolt against British colonial rule, known as the Arab Revolt of 1936. Historically, Palestinian villagers wore the kufiya to protect themselves from the sun and sand, and city dwellers wore the fez. But when the Arab Revolt started, revolutionaries, both urbanite and villagers, covered their head with the kufiya so that they would not be identified by the British colonizers during the revolt. The British colonizers were threatened by the power of the kufiya, so they banned the kufiya. Probably the first known ban over the kufiya. The kufiya moved beyond social significance and into signifier of national identity and resistance. The kufiya is an interesting product. First and foremost, it is a scarf. It's useful for protection, but it's also a cultural icon and an iconic fashion item. Like all consumer items, how is it that China produces up to 90% of the global market's demand for kufiya? One, the Israeli occupation burdened the weavers in Palestine by restricting movement and trade. And two, the free trade market policies that were made after the Oslo Accords of 1993 allowed for imports to flood the market. Only one factory remains that produces kufiyas in Palestine. That's the Hirbawi factory in Hebron. Yes, even in Palestine, kufiyas are imported. So why the political and cultural scrutiny of the kufiya post 9/11? What's the relationship between 9/11 and the kufiya? I asked AI to explain if airplane hijackers wore scarves.
There is no standard dress code for airplane hijackers. In general, hijackers attempt to blend in with other passengers, so they typically wear everyday clothing.
Okay, so I think mass media compounded with mass hysteria make fake news that 9/11 and the kufiya are in a relationship. The agency for the kufiya rests with the wearer and not with the kufiya. The kufiya, it's just a scarf. In 2007, Rachael fronted an ad for Dunkin' Donuts in a black and white scarf.
Now we want to bring you an insane story brought to you by the right-wing blogosphere. Rachael Ray, I think everybody's familiar with her, was doing an ad campaign for Dunkin' Donuts, and she's got a lovely little picture, a little scarf, of course, drinking some coffee, looks great. Unfortunately, this was outrageous, unacceptable, and obviously signaled surrender to our enemies.
Oh God!
Oh,
it's that is audacious. That is in your face.
And it turns out it's her scarf. Look at that. It looks like it's a Palestinian scarf. And of course, the Palestinians are evil. They're part of the Muslim terrorists. And so, how dare we give in to the jihadists?
In 2007, Urban Outfitters sold a kufiya scarf, which was not made in Palestine, probably made in China. The kufiya was labeled as anti-war woven scarves. It stirred up so much mass hysteria and controversy that Urban Outfitters canceled selling what they called the anti-war woven scarves. Of course, there is that one single association of a kufiya and an airplane hijacker. Laila Khaled, hijacker extraordinaire. Laila Khaled is the first female airplane hijacker. Laila had 6 cosmetic surgeries done on her face to avoid detection in order to hijack a second plane. The photojournalist Eddie Adams crafted an image of the revolutionary icon wrapped in a kufiya. The image became iconic, connecting the 1960s counterculture that resistance by the oppressed is the way to freedom. This was an image created for the Western mass media to consume, but we love it anyways. Tarek Al-Ghoussein was a photographer who defined his work as performance photography. In this image, Tarek is performing in a kufiya, walking close to an airplane. The camera is set up with a timer. Like Laila Khaled's careful choice for the Eddie Adams image, Tarek is referencing how mass media conflates the kufiya with airplanes. These images were created in direct response to the events of 9/11. All these images are part of Tarek's work titled Self-Portrait. This particular series of photographs is incredibly popular. The self-portrait series appeared in 2007 and 2008 at the Sotheby's auction and in 2008 at the Christie's auction. There was zero controversy over the images then. Controversy was stirred in 2023 at the Christie's auction with the work of the artist Ayman Baalbaki. Ayman is an artist who has invented a genre of painting. To come across a mulatham is a very specific encounter. Me, myself personally, I've never seen a mulatham in real life. That's because the places I've lived in were not conflict zones. Ayman encountered the mulatham because of his lived experience of the Lebanese Civil War.
بلشت بأول رسم للفدائيين بين سنة 2000 و 2001. فأول فدائي رسمته كنت بالأردن مع مروان، وإجا الموضوع بشغل حول ذاكرة الحرب. كنت عم فكر كتير بالمباني اللي بتعنيني بذاكرة الحرب، بالوجوه اللي علقاني براسي. صرت بحبش شوي بين الأحلام، الاشياء اللي طابعة براسي، بين يعني أي شيء ممكن يعمل رمز دليلي فردي وجمعي. فإجت 11 أيلول صار خياري كتير صعب، كان أو بتراجع رغم أني أنا على ذاكرة الحرب، بس يعني التفسير كان صعب للآخرين أنه هذا من وين جاي الشرعية تبع العمل. فبذكر أنه أساتذتي بفرنسا طالبوني أني وقف إرسمون ونبهوني أنه عم تعمل أضحية بنفسك، وكملت.
School textbooks reinforce national identity through content and images. Palestinian school textbooks construct a visual language by the placement of the kufiya, and the flag symmetrically equates the kufiya and the national flag. Jeffar Khaldi is a prolific artist who also developed his own visual language in his painting. This is Jeffar's ancestral relevance of the kufiya in Jeffar's work Self-Portrait.
You know, for me, like the earliest memory of my childhood was like the symbol of kufiya, of the kufiya. شوف جدي الله يرحمه كان دائما بالليل يروح يحرس، فكان دائما بالليل يحمل ال AK-47 كلاشين and he put الكوفية على وجهه and go out for the night. So for me this was like it impacted me a lot as far as what they symbolized, like a resistance, it symbolized like identity. It's an identity also, identity and resistance, to be free. Inevitable for me to put the kufiya.
Palantir is a publicly traded tech company that builds software to empower organizations to effectively integrate their data, decisions, and operations. Palantir Technologies was founded in response to 9/11 with seed funding from the CIA. Palantir's mission was explicit: to prevent another attack like 9/11 by connecting the data dots that agencies did not have centralized. If you want to connect all the dots, that translates to mass surveillance, a loss of privacy, and a loss of civil liberties. The invasive nature of what tech is doing triggers anxiety. Jawad Al Malhi's work, Measures of Uncertainty, is a body of work started in 2013. Jawad explores the idea of surveillance. These are images surveilling groups of young men gathering. Everything feels uncertain. It's like a moment before an outbreak, or maybe it is after, but all the faces are exposed. Jawad describes his work as, "My focus is on how the event is a catalyst to the unfolding of other events, how the scene is watched and observed by onlookers, and how the crowds gather, form, and disintegrate." This description of surveillance by Jawad sounds very much like the work of Palantir and big tech companies. Big tech are connecting the dots, painting by numbers, and filling in the picture. The kufiya as a function worn to avoid detection in environments using the most invasive technology has now become obsolete. We are now thinking beyond the kufiya. Big tech is thinking beyond the kufiya. How will tech evolve the gaze into contemporary Arab art, and how will resistance in contemporary Arab art be exploited? Remember, if you don't pay for the product, you are the product.
I'm sure you've heard of this company by now, but what do they do specifically?
Our enemies. We built this chain. We believe America's a great country and our enemies should suffer.
Okay, there's that, but here's what they also do and why it matters. Palantir software connects everything from surveillance footage, social media, phone records, and even border crossings. It uses that data to find patterns, helping governments find out who to target and when to strike. Basically, they give governments God mode. But here's why you should care. Palantir isn't bound by the same rules as the NSA. They don't need warrants or oversight, and it's exactly why governments love them. Your digital life, what you say, where you go, who you talk to, can be used to make life and death decisions. And you'll never know, because now it's being used for everything. To predict crime in American cities by flagging certain zip codes as high risk, to monitor immigrants that are illegally crossing the border, and now increasingly even tracking political protests. In a way, our basic freedoms can now be a security threat.
I don't think in win-lose, I think in domination.
Because their duty isn't to the public, it's to profit for the shareholders and making their clients happy. Here's the most disturbing part though. For every Palantir that you've heard, there's dozens more that you've never heard about, and you probably never will. One of this is an Israeli spy company run by ex-Mossad agents, and their most famous client, Harvey Weinstein. I broke down their entire story in my video on private spies, so click here to watch the full video.